The photograph in his hand was of himself. Not a copy he half remembered posing for, not some picture Beth had snapped on her phone and forgotten. This one was old. Its corners had gone soft with handling, and the white border had faded to the color of weak tea. He looked younger in it, 22 maybe, standing in a doorway he did not recognize while the sun cut hard across his face. And it had been pressed flat between the pages of a diary that was not his, in a house he had walked into for the first time that same afternoon, in the private upstairs room of the woman who had raised the girl he was supposed to be falling in love with. Marion, Beth's mother. His own face looked up at him out of her small, slanting handwriting, and for a moment Nate Ford forgot how to breathe. The lake wind pushed at the curtain. Somewhere below, a screen door clapped shut, and a laugh he knew, Beth's laugh, bright and careless, floated up through the floorboards. He should have put the diary down. He knew, even then, that he would not be able to unsee this, that whatever came next began right here, with his thumb pressed white against a photograph he had never once handed to anyone in this family. Why did she have it? Why would she keep it? To understand that, you have to go back 3 days, to a Thursday that had smelled of sawdust and hot varnish, and nothing at all like trouble. Nate had spent that afternoon on his knees in the workshop, running an oiled rag along the grain of a walnut chair that had come to him in 6 pieces. It was quiet work, the kind he liked, the plane hissing, the curls of wood collecting at his boots, the low fan turning the July heat around the room without ever quite carrying it out the open door. He was better with things that could be mended than with people. Things did not leave. Things did not ask you how you were doing and then look somewhere else while you answered. A chair only wanted patience, and patience was the one thing he had in surplus. His phone buzzed against the workbench, skittering into a pile of shavings. "You're not answering because you're pretending you can't hear it," Beth said when he picked up. "I can literally hear the fan. Nate, I'm here." He wedged the phone against his shoulder and kept sanding. "What's up?" "So, don't panic. That's a terrible way to start. My mom wants to meet you." A pause, the sound of Beth chewing something. "Like this weekend. She's got the lake house. Well, it's not a house. It's this whole guest house thing she runs. It's honestly a lot. And she does this summer thing where the whole family comes up, and I told her about you, and now she wants you there. And I said yes because I panicked, so the sandpaper stopped." Nate looked at the smear of oil on his knuckles, at the callus at the base of his thumb, and pressed it. Once, the way he did when a room got suddenly too full of expectation. "A whole weekend," he said. 2 nights. 3 if you love me. A breath. You don't have to love me. Just come. She's making it a thing, and if you're not there, it becomes a whole other thing, and I would rather have the first thing than the second thing." He smiled despite himself. That was Beth all over. A girl who narrated her own life at a run and never quite stopped to see whether you were keeping up. They had been together 9 weeks. He could count them, which was maybe the problem. You did not usually count the weeks of something that was going well. "What's she like?" he asked. "Your mom." The line went, for the first time, quiet. "She's a lot," Beth said finally. And something under the words had gone careful. She's good. Everyone loves her. It's kind of annoying, actually, growing up with someone everyone loves. You'll see. Just, she notices things. So don't do the thing where you go all wooden and answer in 3 words. I don't do that. You did it to my whole book club. Nate, your book club asked me what my intentions were. In front of the cheese. Beth laughed, and the careful thing lifted, and they were easy again, and he told her he would come. When he hung up, the workshop had gone gold at the edges, the late sun laying itself along the floor in one long bar, and he stood there in it a while, not working, listening to the fan turn. He should have felt only the ordinary nerves of a man about to meet a mother. Instead, he felt the way he had not let himself feel in a long time. That faint, dangerous lift under the ribs that came when a door opened onto a life larger than the one you had been carefully keeping small. He had lost his own mother the year he turned 22. That was the plain fact of him, the one he did not say out loud, the one that sat behind everything. She had been gone 6 years now. And in those 6 years, he had built a whole method of living. Keep the circle small. Keep your hands busy. Keep the loving to a scale you could survive losing. Beth had wandered into that method without knowing it existed. She was warmth without weight. He had told himself that was enough. He had almost believed it. He locked the workshop, drove home past yards where sprinklers ticked over cut grass, and did not think about the lake once. That, later, would strike him as strange, that a man could drive straight toward the thing that would undo him and feel nothing but the summer coming through the window. They went up on Saturday morning. Beth's little car packed with a cooler and 3 tote bags and a bottle of wine she kept turning to check as though it might climb out. The road left the town and found the hills, and the hills opened, and then there was the water. A long silver lake laid flat between banks of pine, so bright under the noon sun that Nate had to look away from it. There, Beth said, pointing with her whole hand, the blue roof. That's us. The guest house sat above a shallow cove, a rambling white place with a wraparound porch and a garden falling in soft terraces toward a wooden dock. Lavender ran along the path in dusty purple rows, and the heat lifted the smell of it up through the open windows so thickly that Nate breathed it in before he had even stopped the car. Bees worked the beds. A hummingbird feeder turned slow circles under the eave. Somewhere a wind chime touched 3 notes and let them fade. "It's beautiful," he said, and meant it, and felt the lift under his ribs again, sharper now. "It's a lot of work, is what it is." Beth was already out of the car, tugging a tote onto her shoulder. "She does everything herself. She won't let anyone help. It drives my aunt insane." "Mom! Mom, we're here." The screen door opened. Nate had built a picture in his head on the drive up, the way you do, some soft, blurred idea of a woman in an apron, gray and gentle and grateful for company. The woman who came down the porch steps was nothing he had built. She was tall, in a faded linen dress the color of the lavender behind her. Her dark hair going silver at the temple and pinned up loosely so that strands of it moved in the lake wind. There was a smear of flour on her forearm. She moved the way people move in their own place, without hurry, and when her eyes found Nate across the gravel they stopped on him. Really stopped. One held second longer than a stranger's eyes should. And something crossed her face that he could not read and that she put away almost before it arrived. "You must be Nate," Marion Hale said. "Mrs. Hale, Marion." She came the last steps and put out her hand, and he took it, and her grip was warm and dry and steady, a working hand, calloused along the same edge his own was. "We don't stand on ceremony up here. The lake wears it off you by the 2nd day. Her voice was low and unhurried, each sentence given room to finish. "You've had a long drive. You'll be wanting water before anything else. The heat off that road is worse than it looks." "I'm all right," he said, which was 3 words. And Beth shot him a look, and Marion's mouth moved at one corner. "He's all right," she told her daughter. "We'll see how long that lasts. Come out of the sun, both of you." She turned to lead them up, and Nate stood one beat too long on the gravel, because for the length of that handshake he'd had the oddest sensation, not attraction, not yet. He would not let himself call it that, but recognition. As though he had met this woman before and could not place the room. He pressed his thumb into his palm and followed her up onto the porch, into the smell of bread and lavender and warm wood, and told himself it was only the drive, only the heat, only the lift of a beautiful place after too many months of the small, careful life. Inside, the guest house was cool and dim and full of the work of hands. That was the thing Nate saw before he saw anything else. The whole place had been built and mended and built again by someone who cared how a joint sat. The banister had been turned on a lathe. The window seats were fitted so cleanly he could not find the seam. He ran his fingers along the edge of the long kitchen table without meaning to, and Marion, pouring water at the counter, watched him do it over her shoulder. "You notice the table," she said. "Sorry," he pulled his hand back. "Habit, I work with wood. I wasn't. Don't apologize for looking at a thing the right way." She set a sweating glass in front of him. The ice cracked as the water hit it. Most people put their drink down on it and never see it once. It was oak from a tree that came down in a storm the first winter I was here. A man in the village milled it for me, and I made the rest myself, badly, over about 2 years. She dried her hands on a towel tucked at her waist. The middle leaf still doesn't sit flush. It bothers me every single meal. Can I see? She blinked, and there was that held second again. And then something in her face eased, as though he had answered a question she had not asked out loud. "It's under the seam by the window end," she said. "Careful, the lights pour there." Beth, halfway through unloading the cooler, groaned, "Oh no, there's 2 of you." "Mom, we've been here 4 minutes, and you've already found the only other person alive who wants to talk about a table." "Go and put the wine somewhere cold, Bethy," Marion said mildly, and Beth went, and Nate crouched by the window end of the table and ran his thumb along the join, and Marion crouched beside him, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. Up close she smelled of flower and lavender and something green, cut stems maybe. The window light came through pale over the wood. "There," she said quietly, and put her finger next to his on the seam, not touching, close. "You feel where it lifts. You didn't clamp it long enough while it cured." He said it before he could soften it, and then winced. "Sorry, it's an easy thing to do." No, she sat back on her heels and looked at him, and there was the ghost of something in it. Amusement, maybe, or grief. He honestly could not tell. "No, you're right. I didn't. I was in a hurry that year. I was in a hurry to make the whole place mine so fast that nothing would have room to fall apart." She stood, one hand to her knee, and the moment closed over like water. "You're the first person in 9 years to tell me why, instead of just that, it wobbles. Drink your water, Nate. Dinner's at 7, and my sister will be here by 6 with opinions." He drank his water. Over the rim of the glass, he watched her move back to the counter, roll her sleeves, sink her hands into a bowl of dough, and he thought, "I am in trouble." He did not yet know how much or of what kind. He only knew that something in him had turned over at the sight of a woman fixing her own broken table, and that it had nothing to do with the girl carrying wine down to the cold cellar, and everything to do with a recognition he still could not name. Dinner was on the porch as the light went long and honeyed over the lake. Marion's sister Ruth arrived exactly at 6 as promised, a brisk woman with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and she took one look at Nate and one look at her sister and settled into a chair like a woman getting comfortable for a show. "So you're the woodworker," Ruth said, spreading her napkin. Beth said carpenter. Marion said woodworker. There was a whole discussion. You should know your job title was debated at length before you arrived. "Ruth," Marion said. "I'm being friendly." Ruth turned to Nate. "She never lets anyone up here, you understand, in 9 years. Beth's brought exactly 2 boyfriends to this lake, and both times Marion stayed in the kitchen and let me do the interrogating. And now here she is on the porch." Ruth reached for the bread. "So you must have said something at the table. What did he say, Marion?" "He told me why the leaf doesn't sit flush," Marion said, passing the salad, her face perfectly calm. "Which is more than you've ever managed, and you've eaten off it 200 times. I'm the guest of honor of that table. You're the reason there are wine rings on it." Beth laughed, delighted, kicking her feet up onto the porch rail. "This is so much better than the book club," she told Nate. "Nobody's asked your intentions once." "Give me time," Ruth said. "The evening's young." Nate ate and answered when he was spoken to, and did not go wooden. He was surprised afterward at how not wooden he had been. It was the table, maybe, or the lake, or the way Marion ran the conversation like a woman guiding a boat, giving her sister slack and then a gentle correction. Drawing Beth out and letting Nate stay quiet without ever letting him vanish. Twice he caught her watching him across the candles with that same weighing look, and both times she moved her eyes away before he could hold them, and touched with 2 fingers a thin ring that hung on a chain at her collarbone. He noticed it because he noticed hands. He wondered whose ring it had been. He did not ask. There was a whole shape of things this family did not talk about. He could feel it around the table, the way you feel a cold draught in an old house, a door somewhere left open onto a room nobody used. Beth's father was not mentioned. There was no place set that had been cleared. There was only the ring, and the way the talk moved carefully around a space in the middle of the family, as though around a chair that was not there. "You're quiet," Marion said to him, low, while Ruth and Beth argued about whether the lake was warm enough yet to swim. "I'm listening." "I can see that." She refilled his glass with water, not wine, she had noticed at some point, that he had let the wine sit and set the pitcher down. "You listen the way people do when they learned early that it was safer than talking. I know the look. I raised a girl who talks so she doesn't have to feel anything, and I married a man who—" She stopped. Her fingers found the ring at her throat. "Well, I know the look, is all. You don't have to perform for us, Nate. Nobody up here is grading you. It was a small kindness. It should have meant nothing." But no one had said a thing like that to him in 6 years, had looked straight at the careful, useful, distant machine he had built of himself, and told it, gently, that it could rest, and he had to look out at the darkening lake for a moment to keep his face in order. "Thank you," he said, and it came out rougher than 3 words should. Marion looked at him a second longer. Then she rose, gathering plates, and the evening moved on, and Beth pulled him down to the dock to watch the last light go off the water, and it should have been enough. All of it, a good weekend with a good family. But he lay awake that night in the narrow guest room, under the eave, listening to the lake work against the pilings and a moth tap the screen, and he could not stop turning it over, the held second on the gravel. The recognition he couldn't place. Why does she have that look when she sees me? And above all the sense, absurd and certain, that he had been in this house before he had ever driven up its road. He got up for water a little after 1. The house was dark and cooling, the day's heat still ticking out of the boards. He found the kitchen by feel, drank at the sink, and on his way back stopped at the foot of the stairs, because a line of lamplight lay across the upstairs landing where a door stood ajar. He thought he heard Marion, not crying, nothing so simple, just a long breath let out slow, the sound a person makes when they are alone and have finally stopped holding themselves up. He should have gone back to bed. Instead, he stood there, one hand on the newel post that some careful person had turned on a lathe years ago, and he heard the small solid sound of a book being closed, and the click of the lamp, and then nothing. In the morning she was gone before any of them woke, a note on the oak table, gone into the village for flour and eggs, back by 9, coffee's made. Beth slept late. Ruth had gone home the night before. And Nate, carrying his empty coffee cup back upstairs to change, passed the landing where the door still stood open onto Marion's small bright room and saw, on the desk by the window, a diary left closed with a pencil marking its place, and beside it, fallen loose onto the wood, the corner of an old photograph gone the color of weak tea. He knew, before he crossed the room, that he should not. He crossed it anyway. He picked the diary up because the photograph was inside it now, slid half back between the pages by whoever had closed the book in the dark. And he opened it to the pencil's place, and the face that looked up at him out of Marion Hale's small, slanting handwriting was his own younger 22, standing in a doorway he did not recognize, with the sun cutting hard across his face. Below it, in her hand, 3 words he had no way to understand. The lake wind pushed at the curtain. Down through the floor came the clap of the screen door, and Beth's bright, careless laugh, calling his name up the stairs. And Nate stood frozen with his own past in his hands, and understood that the weekend was over, and that something far larger and far older had only just begun. He did not read it all. He could not. His eyes went to the 3 words beneath his own young face, small, pressed hard into the paper, the pencil gone almost through, and the floor seemed to tilt under him. He came back. That was all. 3 words, and no date he could find, and the rest of the page turned away from him into her private handwriting, close and slanted, and none of it his to see. His name lived somewhere further down. He caught it, once, the 4 letters of it in her hand, and that was the thing that finally moved him. The sight of Nate written by a woman he had known for a day, in a book she had been keeping shut against the dark since long before he drove up her road. Nate? Beth's voice climbed the stairs, easy, unbothered. Are you decent? Mom's back. She brought those cinnamon things. Come down before Ruth's ghost drives up and eats them all. His hands did not feel like his hands. He closed the diary the way it had been closed, pencil at the place, and he tried to lay the photograph back exactly as it had fallen. The corner loose against the wood, tea-colored, patient, and could not remember if the corner had pointed toward the window or away, and stood there a full breath choosing, as though the angle of a photograph were a thing a man could be caught by. He set it corner to the window. He stepped back. The lake wind lifted the curtain and let it fall, and for one sick moment he was certain the paper had moved, that she would know, that she already knew. Coming, he called, and heard how wrong his voice was, and cleared it and said it again. Coming down. He went down. The kitchen was full of morning and the smell of hot sugar. Marion stood at the counter in the same faded linen, sleeves shoved to the elbow, unpacking a paper sack, a brown wax of flour, a carton of eggs she set into a bowl one at a time. A knot of something green with the field still on it. Sunlight came off the lake through the window and lay along the oak table, along the seam that did not sit flush, along the flower on her forearm, and she looked up when he came in and smiled. And it was an ordinary smile, and it undid him more than anything else could have. "There he is," she said. "Beth swore you were awake an hour ago. I said no man sleeps through that fan of his and wakes cheerful. I'm not cheerful," Nate said, and made himself stand at the table like a person, one hand flat on the wood. "I don't do cheerful before 9. "He really doesn't," Beth said, folding herself into a chair with a cinnamon roll already in hand. "It's a whole thing. Don't take it personally, Mom. He was born 40. Marion's eyes came to him and rested a second that held second, the one from the gravel, the one he now understood he had been feeling since the moment he arrived and had no name for still. "40's a good age to be born," she said. "Fewer surprises." She turned back to the eggs. "Sit down, Nate. Eat something before you fall over. You've gone the color of the tablecloth. Long night." His thumb pressed hard into his palm. "New bed. The Eve room keeps you up the first night. It's the water." She cracked an egg one-handed against the bowl's rim, clean, and did not look at him, and her voice stayed low and even and gave every word its room. "Second night you'll sleep like the tide's rocking you. Everyone does. This house takes a day to let you in." She paused with the shell in her fingers. "Then it doesn't let you leave. Ask Ruth. 9 years I've been trying to get her to go home before 10. Beth laughed. Nate did not. He was watching Marion's hands, the calloused edge that matched his own, and thinking he came back, and thinking of a doorway with the sun cutting hard across it, and he had the wild urge to lay the whole thing on the oak table between them, the diary, the photograph, the 6 years, all of it, and ask her. Plainly, the way you asked a joint why it lifted, what am I to you, that you should have my face in your book? He said none of it. He sat. He ate a cinnamon roll he did not taste. And when Marion set a glass of water in front of him without being asked, the way she had at every meal, he understood that she had been watching him be unwell and had decided, quietly, to take care of it, and the ordinary kindness of that sat in his chest like a stone he could not swallow around. "So," Beth said, licking sugar off her thumb, "I was thinking we take the canoe out before it gets stupid hot." "Mom, is the canoe still?" "The canoe has a soft plank on the left seat, which I've told you every summer for 4 years. Marion wiped her hands. Nate can fix it." "Can't you, Nate? It's why she brought you." "I brought him because I like him," Beth said, wounded. "You brought him because the porch rail's loose, too, and the garden gate and the cellar door drops half an inch when it rains." Marion's mouth moved at the corner. "I've had a list going since April. I just didn't tell you it was a list." It was meant lightly, and Beth took it lightly, groaning, and Nate managed something like a smile. But under it he felt the ground shift again, because there it was, out loud, the thing the whole house had been telling him since he touched the banister. She fixed everything herself. She let no one help. And she had, at some point in the 9 years, kept a photograph of a 22-year-old man she was now feeding cinnamon rolls to, and written under it that he had come back. Back to what? Back to whom? He was still turning it when tires sounded on the gravel outside, not Ruth's careful crawl, but something bigger, heavier, an engine that idled a beat too long before it cut, the sound of a man who liked you to hear him arrive. Marion went still at the counter. It was small, and it was complete, the way a bird goes still, every easy line of her stopping at once. Beth twisted in her chair to look out the window and made a sound low in her throat. "Oh, no," Beth said. "He's early." "Mom, You said Sunday. You said Sunday for a reason, so we'd be. I know what I said. Marion untied the towel from her waist, folded it once, set it down. Her hand went to her collarbone, to the thin ring on its chain, and touched it, and dropped. It's fine. Nate, don't get up. Beth was already up, already at the window. And Nate rose too, because a weekend of reading rooms had taught him that this room had just changed temperature. And he wanted to be standing when he learned why. A car door shut, solid and expensive, boots on gravel. And then a big man filled the porch door, ducking under the lintel the way tall men learn to, a linen jacket over an open collar, a bottle of wine in one hand held out like a passport. He was handsome in the settled, well-fed way of a man who had never been told no in a room that mattered. Silver at the temples like Marion, but wearing it as a claim rather than a season, and he took the kitchen in with one pass of his eyes, the flour, the eggs, the daughter, and last of all the stranger standing at the table, with his hand flat on the wood, and something behind his smile did the arithmetic, and did not like the total. Marion, he said, warm as sun on shallow water. I'm early. I couldn't wait for Sunday. That lake's been calling me all week, and you know I've no willpower where you're concerned. He set the wine on the oak table, right on the seam, without looking at where he set it. And here's Beth. Beth, you get taller. I really don't, Gordon, Beth said. I stopped when I was 15. And who's this? Gordon's eyes came to Nate and stayed, still smiling. You didn't tell me you had a handyman up, Marion Good. That gate's been a disgrace 2 summers running. The kitchen held its breath. Nate felt Beth go rigid beside him, felt the correction rise in her, and he put his hand very lightly against her back before she could spend it. Not his fight, not yet. And he looked at Gordon and let the silence do a little work first, the way Marion did. Nate Ford, he said, and put his hand out across the table, over the wine. I'm with Beth. There was the smallest pause while Gordon rebuilt the room. Then the smile widened, and the big warm hand came out and took his, and squeezed a half-second past friendly. Gordon Pruitt, he said, old friend of the family. Very old friend. His eyes cut to Marion, fond, proprietary, some of us longer than others. Gordon and I have known each other since the village had one traffic light, Marion said. Her voice had gone smooth and level, the boat-guiding voice, and Nate heard the current under it now that he was listening. Sit down, Gordon, since you're here. There's coffee. Beth, get him a cup. I'll get it, Nate said, and did, because it gave him a reason to move, to put the table between himself and the way Gordon had set that bottle down like a man staking a corner of a field. He filled a cup and set it in front of Gordon and stepped back, and Gordon thanked him without looking, already turning his shoulder, already reeling the room back to himself. So, Gordon said, settling into the chair like it had been kept for him, I won't be coy, because you know I never am. I brought the papers. He patted the linen jacket over his heart. Revised, cleaner than the last. I had my people take out the 2 clauses you didn't like, and I put in the thing about the dock staying public. Your dock, Marion, in perpetuity, your name on it. Everyone can see you gave it to the whole lake. He spread his hands. You keep the guest house standing exactly as it is for the season. Next spring we break ground on the rest. 12 cottages, Marion, tasteful, cedar, not vinyl. I heard you the first time. And you never lift a hammer or a mortgage payment again as long as you live. Gordon, I'm not asking for an answer at breakfast. You brought the papers to breakfast. I brought them to the lake. He smiled at her, and there was real feeling in it, Nate saw, which was the worst part. The man was not a cartoon. The man believed himself generous. I brought them because you keep saying you'll think about it, and then another summer goes by, and you're out there at dawn clamping a table leg by yourself in the fog. I've watched you carry this place on your back for 9 years, Marion. I'm offering to carry it for you. That's all it's ever been. The kitchen was very quiet. Beth was looking at her mother. Marion had not moved from the counter, and her hand had gone again to the ring at her throat, and Nate watched her thumb move once across it, the way his own moved across his palm, and thought, that's her tell. That's the door left open in her. He looked from the ring to Gordon's easy certainty and felt something cold and clear settle in him, the thing he felt when a customer talked confidently about a joint they did not understand. That's a generous offer, Nate said. Every head turned. He had not planned to speak. It is, Gordon agreed, pleased to be understood. It's the generous kind that only works if she says yes. Nate kept his voice mild, kept his hand flat and easy on the counter's edge, the way you keep your voice around a spooked animal. You built the whole thing, so the only door out of it is the one you're holding. Sell, or keep breaking your back alone at dawn. Those aren't the only 2 doors. They're just the 2 you brought. The smile stayed on Gordon's face and left his eyes entirely. Nate, Beth breathed. I'm sure you know a great deal about doors, Gordon said, and let his gaze travel, unhurried, over Nate's worn shirt. The oil worked permanently into the creases of his knuckles, the boots. Being in the trade. I know when one's been hung to swing shut on its own, Nate said. It's a cheap trick, looks like a favor. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Marion set down the towel she had picked up again, without knowing it, and said, in a voice that closed the subject like a lid, Gordon, the coffee's getting cold, and the papers can wait for the table, not the counter. Beth, take Nate down to look at the canoe before it's too hot to move. Go on, both of you. And it was not a request, and Beth took his sleeve, and Nate let himself be pulled out through the screen door into the white heat, his blood going hard in his ears, Gordon's low laugh following them out, a laugh with no humor in it, a laugh that said, we'll see. Outside, the lavender was loud with bees, and the dock threw the light back in flat white sheets, and Beth pulled him halfway down the path before she rounded on him. What was that? She was not laughing now. There was a bright spot of color high on each cheek. You've been here one day, Nate, one, and you go after Gordon Pruitt across the breakfast table, like? He was cornering her. You don't know him. You don't know any of it. He's been circling this place for 3 years, and he's not a monster, he's just... She pushed her hair back, frustrated, glancing up at the house. He's persistent, and he's rich, and half the village thinks Mom's a fool for not taking it, and she can't afford the roof much longer, and it's complicated, and it is not yours to walk into on day 1. Her voice cracked on it. I asked you here, so she'd like you. Not so you'd fight her fights on the porch. That landed. He heard the fear under it, not anger, fear. The particular fear of a daughter who had grown up watching her mother carry a house alone and had decided the safest thing was for everyone to stay calm. And Nate, who knew everything about keeping a life small so it could not hurt you, felt the shame of having spent something that was not his to spend. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. Beth blinked. She had been braced for more. Okay, good. She let out a breath, and some of the color went, and she leaned into him a moment, forehead to his shoulder, the easy warmth of her that had never once had weight. And he put his arm around her and looked over the top of her head at the lake, and did not feel what a man should feel with a girl leaning into him in the sun. He felt the diary. He felt the 3 words. He felt the doorway with the light cut hard across it, and he thought, with a low horror that had been rising in him all morning, that he had walked into this family carrying a thing that did not belong here and had found it waiting for him already, tea-colored, in a locked book upstairs. "I just don't understand him," Beth said into his shirt. "Gordon, why he can't take a no. He's been in love with her for years, everyone knows it, and she's never once—" She stopped. "It doesn't matter. Come on." "The canoe. Give me an actual reason to have brought you." The soft plank was worse than she'd said. The marine ply had drunk 2 summers of lake and gone spongy at the fastenings, and Nate was grateful for it, grateful for a thing with a clear problem and a clear fix. He knelt in the bottom of the beached canoe with the sun hammering the back of his neck and pressed his thumb along the give of the wood. And the work quieted him the way it always did, and Beth sat on the dock with her feet in the water and talked, and slowly the morning steadied. Then Marion came down the path. She came alone, without Gordon, a jug of iced water beating in her hand, and 2 cups hooked in her fingers, and she came down the terraces through the lavender with the bees rising and settling around her. And Nate looked up from the canoe and had to look back down at once, because the sight of her did something to him he could not have named across a breakfast table. "He's gone into the village," she said to Beth, setting the jug on the dock. "He'll be back for dinner, God help us, but he's gone for now." She poured a cup and crouched at the edge of the canoe and held it out to Nate, and he took it. And their fingers did not touch, and the not touching was somehow louder than touching would have been. "Drink that. You've been in the sun an hour. Thank you." "Beth, your aunt wants you to call her. Something about the church flowers. She's left 3 messages." Marion did not look away from the canoe. "Go on and call her before she drives up here to say it in person." Beth went, grumbling, up the terraces with her phone, and then it was only the 2 of them at the water's edge, the lake ticking against the hull, a dragonfly stitching the air above the reeds, and Marion looked at the soft plank and at Nate's hands on it and was quiet for a while. "You shouldn't have gone at him like that," she said at last. "Not unkind. Gordon, I know." "Beth told me. Beth's frightened of him leaving, and Beth's frightened of him staying, both at once, and she's decided the way to manage it is that nobody make a sound." Marion turned a cup slowly in her fingers. "You made a sound." She glanced at him, and there was something in it he could not read, something almost like being seen from a great distance. "You were also right, which is worse. He did build the doors to swing shut. I've known it for 3 years and never once had the words for it, and you had them at breakfast on your first day." She looked back at the water. "How did you know that so fast?" "I don't know." He pressed his thumb to the plank. "I notice how things are hung. It's the only thing I'm any good at." "No," Marion said quietly. "It isn't." He looked up. She was very close, crouched at the gunwale, the silver strands loose at her temple, the ring on its chain hanging out over the water where she leaned, and her eyes were on his face, not on his hands, on his face. The way she had looked at him across the gravel and the candles and the counter, that held seconds stretched out now into something that had no end built into it. He felt the whole morning rise into his throat. He thought, I could ask her now. I could say, I saw it. I saw my face in your book. And the wind came off the lake and moved her hair, and she saw the question forming in him. He watched her see it, and something in her went still and afraid, the same stillness as when the big car had idled in the yard, and her hand came up to the ring at her throat. You have your mother's hands, she said. The lake seemed to stop. I never told you about my mother, Nate said. For one held second, Marion did not move at all. Then she stood, All at once, one hand to her knee the way she had at the table, and the closeness broke like a surface breaking. And she was Marion in her own place again, unhurried, sleeves rolled, the boat-guiding voice back in her mouth. "Beth did," she said, on the phone, weeks ago. "She tells me everything, my girl, she just doesn't know she's doing it." She picked up the empty jug. "You lost her young." "That's all I meant." "People who lose someone young get careful hands." "I noticed. I noticed things," Beth warned you. She was already turning up the path, already 3 steps into the lavender, the bees lifting around her hem. "Fix the plank before the sun's overhead." And Nate, he looked up. "Don't take Gordon on again in my kitchen," she said, without turning around. "The next round's mine. It's been mine for 3 years, and I mean to have it." And she went up through the purple and the bees toward the White House, and left him kneeling in the beached canoe with his heart going like a hammer, certain now. In a way he had not been an hour before, that she had not learned about his mother from any phone call, and that the 3 words in her diary were about him, and that whatever door had been left open in this family had been standing open for him longer than he had been alive to walk through it. He could not fix the plank. His hands would not hold the line. He sat back on his heels in the bottom of the canoe and looked at his own oiled knuckles, at the callus at the base of his thumb, and then, because he could not stop himself, he looked back up the terraces at the house and stopped. The photograph. The doorway. The sun cutting hard across his young face. He had been looking at it wrong all morning, looking at his own face. At the tea-colored border, at the 3 words. He had never once looked at the door. He got out of the canoe. He walked up the path through the lavender, past the bee beds, past the porch where Gordon's wine still sweated on the oak, and around the side of the house to the north face where the garden fell away and the old part of the guest house stood, the part Marion had built first, badly, in a hurry, so nothing would have room to fall apart. And there, in the shadowed north wall, weathered gray, hung slightly crooked on hinges that had dropped half an inch with 9 years of rain, was a doorway he had never in his life walked through, and had been standing in when he was 22, the sun coming across it exactly, the way it came now across the back of his hands. Behind him, up in the house, a screen door opened, and Marion's voice called his name down through the summer air, and Nate stood in the doorway from the photograph, unable to move, and did not answer. Nate, closer now, her voice, coming around the north corner of the house with the bees still working behind it. "Nate? Beth's got the coffee going again. She wants to—" Oh. She stopped at the edge of the garden where the lavender gave out and the grass went to moss in the shade of the north wall. He heard her stop. He did not turn. He had one hand flat against the weathered gray frame of the doorway, and under his palm the wood was telling him something the rest of the wall would not. It was warm from the morning, and it was silver gray and split fine along the grain the way old cedar goes, but at the joint where the frame met the sill, his thumb found an edge that was too clean, too square. New oak worked and stained and beaten to look 30 years used, set into a wall that was only 9. "You built this," he said. "This one door. You made it look old." The bees filled the quiet. Somewhere down the slope the lake slapped the pilings, patient, and a cicada wound itself up in the pines and let go. "I built all of it," Marion said. "You know that. I told you the first day. Not like this." He turned his hand on the frame, felt the false weather of it, the grief somebody had sanded into a plank. The rest of the wall's honest. It's 9 years old, and it looks 9 years old. This is younger than that, and you aged it. On purpose. You cut new wood and made it look like it had been standing in the rain since before you got here. He made himself look at her then. Why would somebody do that? She had a dish towel still in her hand, and she wound it once around her knuckles and let it go. The silver strands moved at her temple. Her face had gone to that stillness again, the bird stillness, the whole easy line of her arrested at once, and behind it he watched her decide, very fast, how little she could give him and have it be enough. "Because I liked the shape of it," she said. "A door I saw a long time ago. I copied it. People do that, Nate. You copy a chair you loved. You've done it. I copy a chair. I don't make it lie about its age. Then you and I work differently." Marion, he stepped down out of the frame, and the shade let go of him, and the heat came back across his shoulders, and he could smell the lavender gone hot, and the green underneath it, cut stems, her. There's a photograph of this door. There's a photograph of a man standing right where I was standing. And the light comes across him exactly the way it just came across me, and he's 22, and he's got my. He stopped. His own voice had gotten away from him. I saw it. I wasn't looking for it. I saw it this morning. For one held second, Marion Hale did not breathe. Then she folded the towel in half, and in half again, small and neat. The way she'd folded it in the kitchen when the big car idled in the yard, and when she spoke her voice had gone level and low, and given every word its full room. And it frightened him more than tears would have. "Beth's waiting," she said. "The coffee's poured. Go up and drink it before it's stewed. And don't, Nate, look at me." He looked. Her eyes were dry and terribly steady. "Don't say a word of this to my daughter. Not one. Whatever you think you saw. You give me till the house is quiet tonight, and I'll tell you the whole of it, every piece. I swear it to you. But not in front of Beth, and not with Gordon's car in my yard. You've walked into something that's older than you, and you don't get to set it off at breakfast because it's burning your hands." Her thumb had found the ring at her throat. "Can you do that? Can you carry a thing quietly for one day? I think you can. I think it's the one thing you're better at than anyone I've met." The cicada wound down. He wanted to be angry and could not find the floor for it, because she was right, that was the worst of it. She had read the machine of him in a day and named its single working part. "Till tonight," he said. "Till tonight." She turned to go and stopped, one hand on the false old frame, not looking back at him. "It's a good door," she said quietly to the wood. "I got it right at least. I got that much right." And she went up through the lavender to the house, and left him standing in the shade with his heart going like a lathe, holding a thing he had promised to hold, not one piece of it his. He went up. He drank the coffee. It had stewed. Beth was cross-legged on the porch swing with a cinnamon roll in her lap and her phone against her ear, saying yes. Aunt Ruth, the white ones, I already told the church the white ones, and she rolled her eyes at Nate over the phone and patted the seat, and he sat, and the swing took his weight with a small iron complaint, and he put his arm along the back of it, because that was what you did, and looked out at the water gone hard and bright toward noon, and carried the thing quietly. "She's insane," Beth said, hanging up. "Ruth, she's had a feud with the flower woman since the spring fair, and now it's my problem." She tore the roll in half and gave him the bigger piece without asking, the easy, unweighted generosity of her, and he took it. "You okay? You've got your face." "What face?" "The one where you've gone somewhere and left the body to answer questions." She said it lightly, but she was watching him, and Beth watching you was Beth at her sharpest. "Is it Gordon?" Don't let Gordon get in your head. He does it to everyone. He got in Dad's head so bad, Dad used to leave the room when the car came up the drive. There it was, a door swinging open on its own. He kept his voice easy, put it where he wanted it. I didn't know your dad and Gordon knew each other. Everyone up here knows everyone. That's the whole horror of it. She licked sugar off her thumb and looked out at the lake, and something in her face went quieter, younger. Dad's been gone a long time. He walked out when I was in college, packed a bag, drove to his brother's in the city, and that was more or less that. Grown-up stuff. Mom kept the house going by herself after, and never once let it drop, which is very Mom, and Gordon's been circling ever since like the world's most patient buzzard. She shrugged, but it wasn't a shrug that meant nothing. I don't hate my dad. I just think he wanted a small, ordinary life and got a woman who builds her own doors. And it broke him a little that he couldn't be enough weather to matter to somebody like that. That's a hard thing to know about your parents. You know hard things about yours. She said it gently, not a question, and leaned into his shoulder, and he let her, and hated himself precisely and quietly. There was somebody before your dad, he said. He made it sound like nothing, like porch talk. There's always a somebody before. God, yes, the great mystery. Beth laughed, but it was a low laugh, careful, the way she'd gone careful on the phone in the workshop 100 years ago on Thursday. Aunt Ruth let it slip once, years back, and Mom shut it down so hard the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Some summer thing when she was barely 20, before any of us. A boy who came through and went. Ruth called him, what did she call him? She frowned at the water. Danny something. Daniel, Ruth said Mom was never quite the same after, and Mom said Ruth, and that was the end of it. Forever. We never spoke of it again. She turned her cinnamon roll over. Why? The cicadas roared up all at once out of the pines, a wall of sound, and let it fall. No reason, Nate said. You said she never let anyone up here. I wondered what taught her that. Beth was quiet a moment. Then she took his hand, the oiled, calloused, careful hand, and turned it over in her lap and traced the callus at the base of his thumb the way you'd read something. And she said, You're doing the thing again. Going somewhere. And he almost told her then. The whole of it rose in his throat, the photograph and the false old door and Danny something who came through and went, and he swallowed it back down because he had promised a woman in a lavender field one quiet day, and because he did not yet have the shape of the thing to hand his girlfriend. And because a coward and a decent man will sometimes make the exact same choice for opposite reasons, and you cannot always tell them apart from the porch. I'm here, he said, and squeezed her hand, and the lie of it sat in his chest with the coffee and the cinnamon and the stone that had been there since morning. Gordon came back for dinner. Of course he did. The tires on the gravel, a little after 6, the engine idling its half-beat too long. The boots. He'd changed his shirt and brought 2 more bottles and a paper cone of dahlias the size of a child's head, which he handed to Beth with a wink and a for the young lady of the house, and Beth took them with a smile that did not reach anywhere and set them in water and stood them at the far end of the counter with their backs to the room. Marion cooked. Marion always cooked. It was where she kept her hands when the rest of her had to be somewhere else, and Nate saw it now, watching her fillet the trout Gordon had also brought, her knife moving clean and even down the spine, while her face stayed shut as a folded towel. They ate on the porch as the light went long and copper over the water. It should have been beautiful. It was beautiful. The lake turned to hammered bronze, the swallows cutting low after the evening bugs, the citronella candles guttering their green sweet smoke against the midges, a warm wind coming up off the water smelling of weed and pine, and the day's heat lifting out of the boards. Gordon sat where he'd sat that morning, in the chair that had been kept for him, and reached across and set his phone face down on the oak table right over the seam that did not sit flush, and Nate watched Marion watch him do it and say nothing. So, Gordon said, when the trout was on the plates and the wine was poured for everyone but Nate, who had his water. I've been thinking about our conversation. We didn't have a conversation, Gordon. You had a monologue, and I had eggs. Beth snorted into her glass. Gordon smiled, unbothered, a man who liked a woman with teeth so long as he believed the teeth were for him. Fair, he said. Then let me have a shorter one. He forked a bite of fish, chewed, gestured with the empty fork out at the darkening water. The dock, the cove, all of it going to shadow. You've made something remarkable here, Marion. I mean that. 9 years, alone, and it's the finest place on this lake, and everyone knows it. But a thing this fine, held up by one pair of hands, he looked, deliberately, at her hands, and then, less deliberately, at Nate's, and did the arithmetic again behind his eyes, and Nate saw him not like the total. One pair of hands gets tired. That's not weakness. That's just the arithmetic of a body. I'm offering you a way to set it down and still watch it stand. I don't know why that reads as an attack. It doesn't read as an attack. Marion set her fork down. It reads as a man who can't hear no, so he keeps rephrasing the question until the woman gets tired enough to say a different word. I know the trick, Gordon. I've watched you run it on the zoning board and the marina and everyone who ever sold you a strip of shore you wanted. You wear people down and call it patience. I call it patience because it is patience, Gordon said, and for the first time something moved under the warmth of him, a colder current, and his eyes went to Nate. I've been patient about a great many things on this lake for a very long time. Longer than some people have been alive to have opinions about my doors. He smiled at Nate then, all teeth. You're what, son? 27? 8? You've got, what, a workshop, a rented one I'd guess, and a good pair of shoulders, and you've been up here 2 days, and you've appointed yourself the man who tells Marion Hale what's a fair offer. It's charming. It really is. He turned back to Marion, easy again. You always did like them like that. Young, good with their hands, full of certainty about the world. A pause, precise as a knife going in. There was a boy like that, wasn't there, years back, before your Tom? Ruth mentioned him once, long ago, at the marina. A summer boy. Danny never could hold his liquor and never could stay put, but Lord, could he make a girl think a doorway was a cathedral. The candle guttered. Nobody breathed. Marion had gone perfectly, entirely still. Her hand did not go to the ring. That was how Nate knew how deep it went, that this once, when it should have, her hand stayed flat on the table, white at the knuckle, because to reach for the ring in front of Gordon would have been to show him where the door was. You'll want to be careful, Gordon, she said, and her voice had not risen a hair. And it was the most dangerous thing Nate had ever heard. You've had a lot of my wine, and you're standing very close to a thing you don't understand and calling it small. That's a bad habit of yours. It's why you'll break ground on your cottages over my empty lot, or not at all. And I'd make my peace with the second one, if I were you. Mom, Beth said. Lo, it's fine, Bethy. It is not fine. None of this is fine. Why is everyone at this table? Beth pushed her chair back, the iron shrieking on the boards, and stood, and her eyes were bright and furious and swimming. Gordon, you don't get to come up here and drink Mom's wine and needle her about some boy from before I was born. That's disgusting. That's actually disgusting. And Nate, she rounded on him, and he had done nothing, and that was almost worse. You've got the face again. You've had it all day. You're 1,000 miles away, and you keep looking at my mother like—" She stopped. She had not known she was going to say it. He watched it arrive in her, watched her hear her own sentence a half-second too late to catch it. and the porch went so quiet that he could hear the lake and the last swallows and the fat green hiss of the citronella, and under all of it, the ring on its chain touched the button of Marion's collar as she finally moved like what, Gordon said, delighted, quiet. A man who has been dealt a card he did not know was in the deck. Nothing. Beth's voice cracked right across the middle. Nothing. I'm tired. I've had too much sun. She snatched her plate and did not look at any of them. I'm going in. Nate, don't. Just don't. I need a minute. And she went, the screen door clapping shut behind her, and her feet quick and hard up the stairs inside, and then a door closing, softly, which was worse than a slam. Gordon looked at Marion. Marion looked at the lake. And Nate sat with his water, sweating a ring onto the oak beside the fine table's crooked seam, and understood that the thing he had promised to carry quietly for one day had gotten too heavy to carry at all, and that it had happened not at breakfast, but at dusk, and not by his hand, but by everyone's at once. Well, Gordon said, rising, buttoning his linen jacket, entirely satisfied. I've clearly interrupted something domestic. He gathered his phone off the seam of the table and slid it into his breast pocket, next to the papers Nate now understood had been there all along, patient as everything Gordon owned. I'll leave the offer with you, Marion. It expires when I get bored. And I've been bored of this lake for years, and I'm still here, so you've got time. At the top of the porch steps he paused and looked back, and the warmth was all the way gone now, and what was under it was almost admiring. You should take a picture of him, he said, nodding at Nate. The carpenter. While he's still got that face. You collect those, don't you? The ones that come through and go. And he went down into the dark, and the big engine turned over, and the headlights swung once across the porch. Across Marion's shut face, across the Dahlias standing with their backs to the room. And then he was gone down the drive, and it was only the two of them, and the lake, and the guttering green light. Marion did not move for a long time. Then she reached out and, with 2 fingers, turned the wet ring Nate's glass had left on the oak, wiping it away with the side of her hand, an old reflex, protecting the table from a mark, and she said, without looking at him, in the low, unhurried voice with all its rooms, "The house'll be quiet in an hour. She'll come out when she's stopped crying, and she'll want tea, and I'll make it, and we'll pretend, all 3 of us, because that's how this family keeps standing." She stood and gathered the plates, one hand to her knee. "Then, when she's asleep, you come down to the kitchen, and I'll keep my word. You've earned it the hard way. You've earned it worse than I meant anyone to." He came down at 11. The house had cooled and gone dark, and the day's warmth was still ticking out of the boards under his socks, and the lake worked at the pilings, patient, endless, and a moth batted the screen over the sink. Marion sat at the long oak table with a single lamp on, and 2 cups of tea already made and going cold, and the diary in front of her, closed, the pencil gone from it. On top of the diary lay the photograph, face up, tea-colored, and his own young face. No, he understood now, not his, looked up at the low lamp out of a doorway that stood, restored to the inch, 40 feet away in the north wall. "Sit down, Nate," Marion said, "and take your hand off your thumb. You do it when a room's too full. I've watched you do it since the gravel." So did he. She touched the edge of the photograph, not turning it toward herself, leaving it facing him. "You have his hands, too, not just your mother's." "Both. It's the cruelest thing, honestly. You got the exact worst of it. Her hands and his face, and the way she went quiet, and the way he stood in a door like the whole future was on the other side of it." Nate sat. The chair took him. He did not touch the tea. "Tell me who he is," he said. Daniel Ford. She said the name the way you set down something you've carried up a long stair. Danny, your father. She let it sit in the lamplight between them. I loved him when I was 20, and he was 22, one whole summer, right here, before there was a guest house. The old cabin stood where the north wall is now, and that door was its door. And he stood in it the morning this was taken, and I had a little camera Ruth gave me, and I took his picture, because I could not believe a person could be that and be looking at me. Her voice did not shake. It was worse that it didn't. And then the summer ended, and he went back to the city, and I stayed, and I thought that was the whole story, the way you do at 20. But it wasn't. No. She turned the ring at her throat once, he wrote for a year. Then the letters got thin. And then there was a girl in the city, and her name was Ellen, and she was my friend, Nate. That's the part I've never said out loud to a living soul. Ellen was my friend from the school in town, and she went to the city the same year, and the two people I loved best in the world found each other there. And neither of them knew, for the longest time, what the other one had been to me. Because I never told them. I let them have it. I stood in that door alone, and I let them have each other, because I was 21, and I had decided that loving someone meant you didn't get to be the reason their life got smaller. The moth hit the screen. The lamp hummed. Somewhere above them, the house held its sleeping daughter. You gave him up, Nate said. I gave them both up. And they married, and they had you, and I heard about it the way you hear about anything up here, second-hand, at the marina, a card that came late. She pressed her lips together. And that would have been the end of it. It should have been, except that when you were 3 years old, Daniel came back. She touched the photograph. Her finger stayed on the doorway, not the face. He drove up this road one night in the rain. There was still just the cabin then. I hadn't the money to build yet. And he stood in that door, soaked through, and told me he'd made a mistake 8 years long, and he'd come to fix it. That he'd leave. That he'd bring the boy. That we could have the summer we'd never finished. She looked up at Nate for the first time, and her eyes were dry and full at once. An impossible weather. 3 words, Nate. That's what's under your face in that book, if you got that far this morning. He came back. I wrote it that night because I needed to have written down. Somewhere. That once in my life, the thing I wanted most drove through the rain to my door and asked. And you said. His voice had gone to gravel. He couldn't finish it. I said, go home to your wife and your son. She said it very simply, the sharpest line in her landing, plain and quiet, no weight on it at all, which was the only way a thing like that can be said. I said, Ellen is my friend, and that boy has a father, and I will not be the storm that takes it from him. I put him back in his car in the rain, and I sent him down this road, and I did not see him or your mother ever again, and 11 years later I finally had the money, and I tore down the cabin and built this whole place in a single furious year, fast, badly, in a hurry. So nothing would have room to fall apart, and the one thing I built slow, the one thing I got exactly right, was that door. I rebuilt his door. So I'd have somewhere to stand. She sat back. So now you know why I looked at you too long on my own gravel. You walked up out of a car, 28 years old, wearing his face and her hands and my whole ruined summer, holding the hand of my daughter. The lake worked at the pilings. Nate looked at the photograph, at the man who was not him, at the door that was, and something enormous turned over in him. Grief for a father he had never been given, and a mother's silence he had never understood, and this woman, this steady, careful, door-building woman who had held the missing half of his own life shut in a book for 28 years. You knew, he said, the whole weekend, from the gravel, You knew whose son I was, and you let me sit at your table, and you let me—" His throat closed. "You watched me fall into whatever this is. You knew, and you let it happen." I didn't let anything happen. For the first time, her voice frayed. I told myself I'd meet you once, be kind to Beth's young man, and put you both back on the road Sunday and go on. That was the plan on the gravel. And then you crouched at my table and told me why the leaf doesn't sit flush. And you took Gordon apart at breakfast the way I've wanted to for 3 years and never had the words. And you went quiet the way she went quiet. And I sat across my own porch from you last night and I thought... She stopped. Her hand came up to the ring and closed around it, whole fist, hiding it. I thought a thing I have no right on this earth to think about my daughter's Nate. And I put my own picture back the wrong way round this morning because my hands were shaking. And you saw. Didn't you? That's how you knew to go looking. I did that. Not you. Marion, so no. She stood, fast, the chair scraping, her knee catching, and she turned away to the dark window and the lake beyond it. Don't tell me I let it happen as though I sat back and watched. I have spent every hour since you got out of that car trying to hold a door shut that I built specifically so it could never quite close. That's the whole story. That's every piece of it, like I promised. Her reflection floated in the black glass, and behind it the invisible lake. You should sleep. You should take Beth home in the morning and be very good to her, better than you've been today. And you should forget you ever saw a photograph. And in a year, this'll be a strange thing that almost happened on a lake. And everyone gets one of those. He stood, too. His chair spoke on the boards. And he heard himself say the thing he had promised, an hour ago, to be too decent to say. And he could no more hold it than he could hold water. I don't want to forget it, he said. That's the trouble. I've spent 6 years forgetting things on purpose so they couldn't cost me anything. And I drove up here 2 days ago and forgot how to do it, and I don't think it started this morning with the photograph. I think it started on the gravel, same as you. The lamp hummed between them. You said everyone gets one strange thing that almost happened. What if I don't want the almost? Marion turned from the glass, and neither of them heard the stare, because it was the good stare, the one she'd turned slow on the lathe and fitted so clean there was no seam to creak, and neither of them saw how long Beth had been standing at the bottom of it in her sleep shirt with 2 cold cups of tea nobody had made her. Until Beth's voice came across the dark kitchen, small and level, and absolutely destroyed, and said, "Whose picture is that on the table?" The moth hit the screen. The lake worked the pilings. And Marion Hale, who had held one door shut for 28 years, watched it come off its hinges in her own kitchen at midnight, and reached, too late, for the ring at her throat. For a moment no one in the kitchen moved, and the only sounds were the small ones, the thin hum of the lamp, the soft knock of the moth at the screen, the lake going on and on against the pilings as though nothing in the house had come apart. "Bethy," Marion said, "don't." Beth came off the last stair into the ring of lamplight, and the 2 cups shook in her hands, the cold tea slopping dark over her fingers. She set them down on the oak with a click that was too loud in the quiet. "Don't, Bethy me. Whose picture is that? Say it out loud so I hear it in words." Marion's hand had found the ring at her throat. Now, slowly, she took it away and laid both palms flat on the table, either side of the photograph, the way a person braces before a wave. "His name is Daniel Ford," she said. "He was a summer I had before your father. Before you, 30 years ago, on this same shore, when the only thing standing here was a cabin, and that door in the north wall was its door." She did not look away from her daughter. "He is Nate's father." The word father went through the room like cold water through a crack. Nate saw it reach Beth, saw her take a step back into the dark by the counter where the dahlias stood with their backs to the room, saw her mouth open and close. His father, Beth said. Yes. You knew. Beth's voice climbed and then caught itself, went flat and terrible, the way her mother's did. You knew on the gravel, when we drove up. When you shook his hand and gave him water and told him not to apologize for looking at the table. You looked at my boyfriend and you saw a man you loved 30 years ago, and you said nothing. You let me carry his bags into your house. I did. Why? It broke on the second letter. Why would you say nothing? Marion was quiet a moment. The lamp hummed. Somewhere out on the black water a loon called once, long and low, and did not call again. Because I decided a long time ago that some doors stay shut, she said, and I have gotten so good at holding this one that I forgot it could ever be knocked on by accident. I meant to be kind to your young man and put you both on the road Sunday and never breathe a word. That was the whole plan, Bethy. I swear it to you on this table I built with my own hands. And then Marion's jaw worked. For the first time since the gravel, Nate watched her look for words and not have them ready. And then he crouched down at the window end and told me why the leaf doesn't sit flush, she said finally, very low. And I had not heard that voice ask that kind of question in 30 years. Beth made a sound with no shape to it. She pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth. Outside the wind came up off the lake and pushed the smell of hot lavender and cooling water through the screen. And the citronella candle they'd left guttering on the porch threw one last green breath across the boards and went out. I need to hear the rest, Beth said. All of it. Now, not the polite version. So Marion told her. She told it plainly, the way she had told Nate an hour before, and Nate stood against the far wall with his thumb pressed white into his palm and let her. Because it was hers to tell, and he had no floor to stand on to help. She told about the boy in the doorway and the little camera Ruth had given her. She told about the letters going thin. She told about Ellen, my friend, Bethy, my own friend from the school in town, and the two people she loved best finding each other in the city, and neither of them ever knowing what the other had been to her. Because she had chosen, at 21, never to say. You gave him away, Beth whispered. I gave them both away. I thought that was what love was. I thought loving somebody meant you never let yourself be the reason their life got smaller. Marion turned the photograph a half-inch on the wood, straightening it against nothing. They married. They had a boy. I heard about it secondhand, at the marina, from a card that came late. And the diary. Beth's eyes had gone to the closed book under the picture. He came back. That's what it says. I read it upside down from the stairs. He came back. Back to where? Here, Marion said it simply. Once, when the boy was small and safe and well-loved and had a whole life around him. Daniel drove up this road in the rain and stood in that door and told me he'd made a long mistake and come to fix it. Her hand rose to the ring and closed around it, whole fist, hiding it. And I put him back in his car and sent him home to his family, and I never saw him again, and 11 years later I finally had the money, and I built this place in one furious year so nothing would have room to fall apart, and the one thing I built slow, the one thing I got exactly right, was his door. So I'd have somewhere to stand, and remember, I once did the decent thing. The kitchen held very still. The moth found the screen again. The tea had gone cold in all 4 cups, and no one reached for any of it. Beth looked at her mother for a long time, and then, terribly, she laughed. One broken note that was not a laugh at all. "So the whole weekend," she said, while I was down at the dock, so happy, so stupidly happy, telling Aunt Ruth on the phone about the white flowers, you were up here falling in love with the ghost of your ruined summer. In front of me, wearing my boyfriend's face. She wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand, hard the way you wipe a table. Do you know what I did, Mom? Do you know what I actually did? I begged him to be charming. I said, don't go all wooden, don't answer in 3 words, please, please make her like you. I set the table for this. I lit the candles. Bethy. Don't. Beth turned on Nate then, and it was worse than the anger, because there was no anger left in it, only a young girl's honest bewilderment. And you. Did you know? When you kissed me goodnight last night, did you already know? No, Nate came off the wall. His voice had gone to gravel. I found the photograph this morning. I've known for one day, Beth, the same as her. I didn't come up here to do this to you. I came up here because you asked me, and I liked you, and I thought, he stopped. Because the true thing was cruel, and she deserved the true thing more than she deserved a kind lie. I thought a small, warm, easy life was all I was ever going to be able to survive. And I was wrong about that, and I'm sorry, and being sorry doesn't give you a single thing back. Beth stood in the dark by the dahlias with cold tea on her fingers and looked at the two of them, her mother and her boyfriend, in the one lamp, and something in her face grew up several years in the space of a breath. I need to not be in this house, she said. I need to go and stand by the water. Alone, and nobody is to follow me. Do you understand? Not one of you. I've spent my whole life talking so I wouldn't have to feel anything, and I would like, for once, to just stand somewhere and feel it. She went out. The screen door clapped, and then, after a moment, it did not clap again. She had caught it and let it close softly, which was worse. And her bare feet went down the porch steps and across the grass toward the dock and the wide black patient lake. Marion made to rise. Nate put out a hand, not touching her. She said no one, he said quietly. Let her have the no one. It's the first thing she's ever asked you for that costs her something. Marion sat back down. She looked at her own hands on the table, the calloused edge that matched his, and for the first time all weekend she looked, simply, old and tired and out of doors to hold shut. You should go to her, she said, in a while. Nate lowered himself into the chair across the corner from her, near, not close, not to fix it. There's nothing to fix, just so she doesn't have to walk back up to the house alone in the dark. He looked at the photograph between them, at the man who was not him, at the door that was. Marion, look at me a second. She looked. I'm not going to say the thing I started to say before she came down the stairs, he said. Not tonight, not with her out there on the dock feeling every year of this at once. There's a right order to things, and I've already gotten it wrong once this weekend. He pressed his thumb to his palm and made himself stop. But I'm not going to unsay it either. I want you to know that. I'm not going to drive down this road Sunday and turn it into a strange thing that almost happened on a lake. You keep offering me that door because it's the safe one. I'm telling you, I saw how it was hung. Marion's eyes filled and did not spill that impossible dry weather of hers. You are the most inconvenient man ever to stand in that door, she said. I come by it honestly. Apparently, it was not a joke, and neither of them smiled. But something in the room eased half a degree. And then Nate stood and went out through the softly closing screen to sit at the top of the dock steps, 10 feet from where Beth sat, with her knees drawn up, and her face to the water. And he did not speak, and she did not tell him to leave. and the two of them watched the lake work the pilings until the sky over the eastern pines went from black to the deep bruised blue that comes before any light at all. "I don't love you," Beth said finally, into the dark, not unkindly. "That's the thing I've been sitting here finding out. I've been trying to be furious that I lost you and it won't catch, because you were never. You were warm and you were easy and you never once frightened me, and I think I picked you exactly because you'd never frightened me." She wrapped her arms tighter around her knees. 9 weeks and you never told me one true hard thing about yourself until tonight, and I never asked, because asking might have made it real, and I don't do real. Mom's right about me. I talk so I don't have to feel it. Beth, is it real with her? She turned her head on her knees and looked at him, and her eyes were wrecked and clear. "Don't lie to me to be kind. I've had enough kind for one summer. Is it real?" Nate looked out at the water, going gray at its far edge. "I've spent 6 years making sure nothing was ever real enough to cost me anything," he said. "And I've known your mother 2 days, and I already know that if I get in that car Sunday, I'll be paying for it the rest of my life." He turned to her. "So yes, I think it's the realest thing that's ever happened to me, and I hate what it costs you. And both of those are true at the same time, and I don't get to choose, only the good one." Beth was quiet a long moment. A fish rose somewhere out in the cove, and the rings spread and smoothed. "She gave him up," she said. "My mom. She had the one thing, and she handed it to her friend and stood in a doorway alone for 30 years because she thought that's what good people do." She wiped her face. "I always thought she never took Gordon because she was proud. She wasn't proud. She was faithful. To a rainstorm, a small, broken breath. God, and now the universe drives his son up her road holding my hand. It's not even a story. It's a joke somebody's telling at her expense." "I don't think it's at her expense," Nate said. "I think it's the door finally getting knocked on. She built it so it could never quite close, Beth. She told me that herself, and I don't think she heard what she was saying when she said it." Beth pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. And then, wet and ragged, she laughed for real, small, but real. "If you two get married, I am never, ever calling you my stepfather," she said. "I'll walk into the lake first. I mean it." "That's fair. I'm going to need about a year, maybe 2. And I'm going to be horrible about it for a while. And then I'm going to be fine. Because I'm always fine. It's my worst quality." She stood and brushed the dock grit from the backs of her legs and looked down at him. She deserves it. That's the part I can't get around no matter how much I want to be the wronged one. After everything she gave away, she deserves to keep one thing that walked up her road. She put out her hand and pulled him up off the step. "Come inside. It's freezing, and the sun's coming, and I want tea that somebody actually made this time." They walked up through the wet lavender together. And the bees were not yet awake. And the whole slope smelled of dew and cold purple, and the day's heat not yet arrived. And at the top of the terraces Marion stood in the lit doorway of her kitchen with a kettle in her hand, watching her daughter and the carpenter come up out of the dark side by side, and Beth, 20 feet off, called out in a voice scraped raw but steady, "Mom, make the good tea. And you and I are going to have the worst 2 years of our lives, and then we're going to be okay. So start bracing now." And Marion set the kettle down on the step and put her hand over her mouth and did not, for once, manage to keep her face in order at all. Gordon came at 9, because Gordon always came. The tires on the gravel, the half-beat idle, the boots. He came up the porch steps with the papers already out of the linen jacket, a good pen clipped to the top page, and he stopped at the top of the steps and read the kitchen in one pass, the 3 of them at the oak table, the 4 cups, the photograph gone from the wood, and the diary gone with it. and whatever he'd rehearsed on the drive he set aside for something better. "Well," he said, "you all look like a family that's had a night." He set the papers on the table, on the seam, and tapped them once with 2 fingers. "Marion, I'll make it plain, since plain's clearly the weather this morning. My offer's on the table. Sign it and the roof's mine to worry about by winter, and you never clamp another table leg alone in the fog." He smiled, warm as shallow water. Or don't, and go on carrying a place that's slowly carrying you. Your 2 doors. Same as ever. Marion stood. She wiped her hands on the towel at her waist, though they were dry, an old reflex, and she walked to the table and picked up his papers, all of them, and squared the edges neatly against the wood the way she squared everything. "You know what your trouble is, Gordon," she said, not unkindly. "You've spent so long being the richest man on this lake that you've forgotten money's not the only thing a person can be too proud to take." She held the papers out to him. "I'm keeping it, all of it, the roof and the fog and the leg that doesn't sit flush. I've had help offered by better men than you and turned it down. And I'll turn yours down too, but I'll tell you the difference." Her chin came up. "This time I've got a reason that isn't only stubbornness. This time somebody's going to help me fix the list, and I'm going to let him, which is the thing I've never once done, and it has exactly nothing to do with your cottages." Gordon's eyes went to Nate, slow, and did the arithmetic one last time. And this time he did not bother to hide that he didn't like the total. "Him," Gordon said. "Him, you're a grown woman making a fool's." "Careful," Nate said. He did not raise his voice. He stayed in his chair with his water sweating a ring onto the oak, easy, the way you keep your voice around a spooked animal. "You're standing very close to a thing you don't understand and calling it small. Somebody warned you about that habit last night." He nodded at the door, the false old one, framed in the north window where the morning came through it exactly. "You told her to take a picture of me, while I still had the face. You want to know why she looked at me like that, Gordon? Ask her sometime." It's a better story than any deal you've ever closed, and you'll never once be in it. Gordon looked from the carpenter to the door in the window to the woman holding his papers out at arm's length, and for the first time in 30 years on that lake, something in the big settled face understood that it had lost, and had, in truth, lost long ago to a rainstorm and never known. He took his papers. He clipped his good pen back to his jacket. "Enjoy your roof," he said, and went down the steps, and the big engine turned over, and the headlights swung once across the empty porch, and then the gravel, and then the drive, and then, mercifully, nothing but the lake and the bees waking up in the lavender. Beth exhaled against the table. "I have wanted to see that for 3 years," she said. "That was better than the flowers. Bethy, I'm a loud one." She stood and gathered the 4 cups and stacked them without a single click, careful as her mother. "I'm going to pack. I'm getting a ride to the city with Aunt Ruth this afternoon. I already texted her. She's thrilled. She gets to interrogate me the whole way, and I'm going to let her, God help me." She paused at the sink with the cups, her back to them, and Nate saw her mother's whole line in her, the shut and steady grief of her. And then she turned around, and it was just Beth, wrecked and brave and 24. "Mom, walk me down to the car when Ruth comes. And put that picture somewhere it can breathe. It's been in a book long enough." She went up the good stairs that made no sound, and left the 2 of them in the kitchen full of mourning. And neither of them said anything for a while, because there was nothing yet that was theirs to say with the daughters' bags still in the house. Ruth came at 2, and there was mercifully no scene. Ruth took one look at all 3 faces and, being Ruth, chose the exact right wrongness to say. "Well, nobody's cooking, somebody's crying, and there's a man standing in the kitchen who's clearly been told something, she announced, setting her reading glasses up into her hair. I've walked into the last 10 minutes of a very long play. Bethy, get in the car and tell me the whole thing before the traffic. Marion, she stopped at her sister, and the briskness went out of her, and she put one hand to Marion's cheek. About time one of them stayed instead of driving off in the rain. That's all I'll say. I'll say it once and never again, and you'll pretend I didn't. She kissed her sister's forehead. Come to the city for the leaves in the autumn. Bring the carpenter. Bring the door if you have to. I don't care. Just come. And then the car went down the drive with Beth's hand out the window, not waving, just open to the summer air, and Marion stood in the gravel where she had stood 2 days before and watched her daughter go. And Nate stood a step behind her and did not touch her. And the lavender was loud with bees, and the lake threw the light back in flat white sheets. And the weekend, at last, was over. They did not rush it. After, that was the thing Nate would have said. Later, if anyone had asked him how it went, that having found at last a thing worth wrecking his careful small life for, he refused to wreck it fast. He drove home Sunday, alone, as he'd come. He went back to his workshop and his walnut chairs and the fan turning the July heat around the room. And he called her in the evenings, and she let him, and the calls got long the way calls do, when neither person can find the reason to hang up. He learned the shape of her days on the lake. She learned the shape of his hands' work. Twice more that summer he drove the road up into the hills with the cove opening silver below him, and the second time he brought his tools, the real ones. In the wooden box his mother's hands had never held but his father's, he now understood, once might have. He fixed the list. All of it. The soft plank in the canoe, the loose porch rail, the garden gate that dragged, the cellar door that dropped half an inch when it rained. And on the last warm evening of August, with the light going long and honeyed over the water and the swallows cutting low after the bugs, he knelt at the window end of the long oak table with 2 clamps and a fresh line of glue, and Marion crouched beside him with the lake wind moving the silver at her temple, and they set the middle leaf flush at last and held it, 4 hands on the wood, while it cured. 9 years it's bothered me, she said, low, every single meal. You were in a hurry that year. You told me. He kept his thumb on the seam, feeling its seat. You built the whole place so fast nothing would have room to fall apart. I've been thinking about that. It's the wrong way round. He looked at her over the table. You clamp a thing slow so it can't come apart later. You were building it fast so it couldn't ever ask you to stay. Marion was quiet. Her hand, on the wood beside his, did not move. You have his face, she said. I stopped seeing it weeks ago. Did you know that? Somewhere in all the phone calls you stopped being his and started being only yours. That's how I knew it was safe to let you drive back up my road. She turned her hand over on the wood, palm up, an open thing, and did not reach, only offered. I have kept one door shut for 30 years. I am very tired of standing in it. Nate put his hand in hers. It was the first time, in all of it, that they had touched on purpose, and it was only a hand, calloused edge to calloused edge. His mother's and his father's and hers, all meeting on a table she had built alone in a furious year, and it was, in the whole clean, quiet weight of it, more than anything either of them had ever let themselves hold. I'm not going home to the city in the rain, he said. I want you to hear the whole of it in words, the way Beth made you say it. I love you, Marion, not the almost, not the strange thing that happened on a lake. You, The woman who fixes her own broken table and lets no one help and built a door so she'd have somewhere to grieve standing up. His voice went rough, and he let it. Let me help. That's the entire thing I'm asking. Let me be the one you finally let help. Marion looked at their 2 hands on the flush and cured and finished wood. And then she reached up with her free hand and unhooked the thin chain from around her neck, the ring sliding off it into her palm, and she looked at it a moment in the copper light, the small plain thing she had carried against her collarbone for 30 years. The tell he had watched her touch since the gravel, and she set it down on the table between them and left it there, out in the open air where it could breathe. All right, she said. And that was all, and it was everything, because Marion Hale had never in her life given away a thing she meant to keep. They were not married that autumn, nor the next spring, and it did not matter, because the thing had already happened at the table with the glue still tacky on their hands. Beth came for the leaves in October, as Ruth had ordered, and was horrible for exactly 1 afternoon, and then, being always fine, was fine. She stood in the false old door in the north wall, with her collar up against the chill, and looked at the man kneeling in the garden, mending her mother's gate, and said, I'm still not calling you anything. You're just Nate. The Lake's Nate. And that, from Beth, was a blessing with the whole family's weight behind it. The photograph came out of the diary for good. Marion framed it, the boy in the doorway, 22, the sun cutting hard across his face, and hung it in the north room where the morning came through the real door onto it, and under it in a smaller frame. She hung a second photograph that Ruth took on that October afternoon with a proper camera. A man of 28 standing in the very same doorway, the very same light coming across the very same hands, 30 years and 1 whole ruined and mended summer between them, and both of them, at last, home, and on winter nights. When the snow came down soft on the cove, and the lake went still under its skin of ice, and the fire cracked in the grate, Marion would sometimes stop in the north room on her way to bed, and stand a moment in front of the 2 frames, the door and the door, the father and the son, and Nate would find her there and put his arms around her from behind, his chin on the silver of her hair. And neither of them would say anything, because the whole of it had already been said in words once, and after that you only have to keep showing up. Love, it turns out, does not always arrive in time to spare you the long years of standing alone in a doorway you built for the purpose. Sometimes it takes 30 summers and a wrong turn, and a daughter's brave broken heart, and it walks up your own gravel wearing a face you gave away, and asks at last to help you carry the thing you swore you could carry by yourself. And the bravest thing a careful person ever does is set down the ring and open the hand and let it. If you stayed with Nate and Marion all the way up that long lavender path, if this story warmed something in you tonight, then take a small moment before you go. Tap that like button, leave a comment, and tell me, could you have done what Marion did all those years ago and stood in the doorway alone? And if stories like this one are the kind you want to fall asleep to, subscribe and stay a while by our fireside. There's always another door about to be knocked on, and we'll be here to open it together. Until the next story, be gentle with the ones who love quietly. They're the ones who stay.